So if we enter rural hamlets, villages, or rural parts in Japan, we can encounter different ways of sustainability or different approaches of sustainability. For example, rebuilding the so-called akiya, the empty houses or buildings not in use anymore, using locally grown trees. Or thinking of ways of producing agricultural products or other products such as bread in a more sustainable way. We can also think of ways of how to treat the forests, the local forests, or what to do with the logs that you get when you have to cut down the trees that were damaged during natural disasters. This example uses the trees for a heated pool in the municipality, and it uses always these logs from the trees that were damaged during that disasters. Or you can take a look at the several agricultural products in many parts of Japan that used to be growing in these parts, but due to the aging of the population, people stop growing these vegetables and even sometimes lose the knowledge to grow vegetables that are quite complex in cultivation, such as wasabi. And younger people who live in that area try to reintroduce these species to the region. So that's all some ways of understanding sustainability, and together with you, I would like to look a bit deeper into some of these activities happening in rural areas. So my aim is to discuss local level approaches that promote ideas of sustainability, and I would like to do that especially against the backdrop of demographic changes and challenges happening throughout Japan. Actually, as Barbara told you, I'm doing research on resilience, which is also, of course, part of sustainability. However, during my fieldwork in 3 different regions in Japan, I've encountered several aspects of ecological sustainability, which is at the core of this conference. So today I would like to provide you some examples of these ecological aspects as well. I'm doing fieldwork in the Sanin region, in an old feudal lodging town that mostly is engaged in forestry. I'm doing also research in the rural Kanto region, in a touristic town. And of course, I'm also planning and continuing my research in the Aso region that, as Barbara told you, was at the core of my dissertation fieldwork as well. So the common features of all of these regions are that they are typical examples of municipalities that are being challenged by demographic change and that feature high rates of aging and declining resident populations. Also, we can see that immigrants play a role in all of these municipalities in introducing new thoughts to the region, and sometimes these ideas are connected to sustainability. I'm understanding these processes as some ways of redefining rurality, but I would like to stress that it's not only the immigrants to these municipalities that push forward this kind of processes of redefining rurality, but it's a mixture of different actors that play a crucial role there, as you will see. So just briefly, I'm not an expert on sustainability as are some previous speakers of this conference, but there are a few approaches to sustainability that I find quite interesting, especially in understanding the processes that we can see in rural Japan. So sustainability as an amorphous concept with a broad range of meanings has also its merits. For example, you can integrate different perspectives or disciplines in order to understand these complex processes of change. Further, if you understand sustainability not as something given, but as a process, and that's something I suppose that many other social scientists also would like to do in a similar way, that is that sustainability is a way to find the means of production, distribution, and consumption of existing resources in a more cohesive, economically efficient, and ecologically viable way. And you will see that in my examples, I will touch upon these different processes of production, distribution, and consumption in areas where many things are declining, including the population. So what makes these processes or these changes interesting to me especially is that we can, when taking a look at sustainability, It helps us understanding how social change shapes the environment, but on the other hand, we can also analyze how environmental change shapes society. And I think we will see that in the end of my presentation more clearly. So as we have been talking about Japan as a whole, or sustainability as a concept in a global scale, I would like to say that, of course, if we take a look at the local level, or especially rural areas, there are some particularities that we should not forget when we address these issues. For example, that there are huge urban-rural disparities, and there are scholars that argue that urban sustainability very often comes at the cost of rural areas. If you think of water, food, or electricity supply, I think most of us will remember the Santeichichi case that makes this case more understandable. Also, more recent research focuses on the resilience of local communities that have been challenged by declining infrastructure and a decreasing population, and especially also social welfare and care. And as I said, in rural Japan, we can see that a lot of immigrants are coming from urban centers and that try to pursue what they perceive as a different kind of lifestyle to what they have been following in the city centers. So these are some pictures or examples of also the visibility of the connection or the link between population change or population decline and sustainability. If we are thinking of the Akiya Mondai, the empty house problem, and the ways to address this, we should not forget that in rural Japan we might also encounter places like these ones where I think it's quite hard to find ways of reusing these buildings at all. And these are examples of all the three areas that I'm looking at. However, today I would not like to talk about these examples, but rather of some ways to integrate understandings of sustainability and approaches to sustainability to local societies. And the first example is what I will call the Tohara Cafe. It is a way of sustainable production in a rural, quite conservative environment. The owners of this cafe are newcomers from the Kanto area who decided that they want to build up a new economic system somewhere in Japan, and they ended up in the Sannin region in western Japan because the mayor of that municipality asked them to come and to realize their ambitions in his town. They used an akiya, an empty house, that they rebuilt by themselves as a cafe, and also they make bread and beer. So far that's not something exceptional for rural Japan. I think you will find similar places all over Japan, but what makes this case quite exceptional is that the owners try to combine this kind of cafe with a broader understanding of sustainability, including local farmers. They ask local farmers, for example, to grow vegetables or to grow the ingredients for their bread and the beer without using pesticides, and they guarantee them that they would use their resources instead. So they are trying to build an economic cycle that's quite different from other parts of Japan, and it seems that they are quite successful in doing that. And they also write books on what they are doing and also attract a lot of tourists, and that's probably also the reason why the mayor asked them to come to them, to the town. Also, and that's interesting for me as a social scientist, they create a place for social exchange. So that's a place where not only the tourists would come and buy the overpriced products, but it's also a place where locals would meet and drink a beer together or have a coffee. Even younger local people would say that there was not a similar place before that was somehow cut off from the traditional hierarchical systems within rural Japan. But this place, being run by outsiders, provides an opportunity for them to talk openly. So in that sense, it also has a social function for a declining community. The owners told me that what we want to say here is that if you just do the obvious things in the traditional way with care and attention, that is enough to achieve the SDGs and enough to create a cycle of economic activity. So just making breads takes 5 to 10 times as much manpower as normally. Then distribution is born and the work is done with as little impact on the natural environment as possible, using raw materials to make bread. That alone is very kind to the natural environment. And I wonder why we don't do such obvious things. This kind of fight we are engaged in now is an antithesis to capitalism. And you can see quite clearly that these newcomers link their activities also to some political ideas they have about capitalism or the way economy should be in rural Japan. And you can imagine that there is a lot of conflict also in these areas where they are doing their activities, because many people would rather follow the established path of funding from like conservative institutions rather than joining these projects. But somehow they managed to implement their ideas into local societies, and more people are at least visiting this place. Another example, quite contrary to that one, is the sustainable decline happening in what I will call the Yama district in rural Kanto. It is a hamlet quite remote from the town center, with only, I think, one young man and his daughter left, except from several households that consists of older adults. And I will show you an example of this single father who lives together with his daughter and his mother in a multi-generational household. He has been living in this district for all his life. However, every time he becomes the head of the neighborhood association, he decides that he cuts down several functions of community activities or community roles that he believes are not necessary anymore for keeping the system running. He wants to provide a realistic, what he believes a realistic understanding of the current situation and the outlook of the hamlet to his own daughter. Because when his daughter wants to meet friends, there are two possibilities. Either they would have to drive with the car for half an hour to the next hamlet where some of her friends would be living, and he would have to pick up the daughter again because it's not able to walk by foot, or to use the bicycle because it's steep hills. Or his daughter would spend many hours a day chatting, playing video games together with friends, and he's totally fine with that because he knows otherwise she wouldn't have social contact at all. What he wants to focus on is the quality of life in that hamlet and the freedom you get once you cut down several of these, what he believes, unnecessary community activities. He also says rather than investing in the reparation or in the construction of new roads in his hamlet, he thinks it's better to engage in the well-being of the children that are living in his hamlet and the neighboring hamlets. So, he told me that I have been working recently to get rid of things and community roles that have been around for a long time, but are actually not necessary. People find it hard to say that things like this and that are actually not necessary anymore, especially for wives and daughters-in-law who have come from outside the area. It's hard for them to say anything about the local area, isn't it? Recently, I have been trying to get rid of things like this by saying to people like the local elders, I think you don't need this. And as you can imagine, there's a lot of resistance of these older adults, but they grudgingly accept because he's the only young people living in that hamlet, and they accept that he would like to design in some way his own future in this hamlet. And what he's doing in the whole municipality, although, is that he tries to revive local traditions together with a children group, which he founded together with a colleague working at the local kindergarten. And the two of them created this MPO of children who would appear on stages throughout the town and would make some performances, sing and dance and have fun. And he explicitly says that for him it's important to do something that is fun and to provide the children opportunity to have fun in a village like this. So he says it's a loose organization that just does all kind of fun things for now. We don't do things we don't like. And the third example that I would like to provide you is an example that links local actors with so-called newcomers to the region. It's the example of the Aso region in central Kyushu and the activities that are linked to the preservation of the grassland that is quite picturesque in that area. And there are long-lasting community practices that burn down the grassland regularly once per year in late February, early March. And it's usually the local, so-called local leaders or local farmers or owners of that grassland that are key persons of organizing this kind of community practices. However, people are aging, less and less people are able to do this job or willing to take the responsibility of organizing this kind of activities. There are also NPOs now that try to support existing community functions. And I think that's something quite interesting. The same landscape is the reason for many newcomers to move to that region in the first place. So they decided, many young people decided to move to Asso because of this landscape. And so for them, preserving that landscape is also an important issue. However, they do it probably in different ways than the traditional local elites would do it. One example is a female local farmer who was heavily involved in the GIAS designation, the globally important agricultural heritage system by the UN. And she pushed forward that designation and attracted kind of an attention to that issue. She also funded the GIAS Café, that was designed as a place for the local community where people could consume locally produced food for a reasonable price. And it's also similar to the Tohara Café, a place where people would meet and chat together. And I also did some of my interviews actually at that place during my fieldwork in Asso. So we can see that many different actors work together or in parallel ways, so to speak, to preserve the landscape. And both groups have understandings of sustainability connected to this very landscape. One of the people responsible for the community activities of burning down that grassland told me that others tell me the grassland that you showed me is a wonderful treasure. And I think, oh, we have to take care of the treasure. Not only do I want to preserve it, but I also want to show it to everyone, and I want everyone to know about it. Showing such things is the link to happiness, and the people who see it will be happy too. So for him it also has like a personal value, which makes him feel good and that he wants to share with other people. And that's why he also engages with the NPO's activities, trying to disseminate the knowledge of doing that kind of practices to the future generations as well. And other farmers in the region too understand that the things they are doing normally throughout the day might be linked to preserving the landscape. So a local farmer told me that I'm a farmer and that's what I do. I farm to protect and preserve the landscape here. In his case, he takes care of the abandoned paddy fields that older residents were not able to cultivate anymore. So he does it for them and gets some money for it, but he doesn't do it primarily for the money, but he thinks it's his responsibility as a young farmer to take care of the farmland and preserve the landscape in that way. So to conclude, we can see that in all of these cases, social aspects of environmental sustainability are clearly visible in the rural approaches to sustainability. Sustaining natural landscape is dependent on the ways to cope with the demographic decline. I gave you some examples of that, and its consequences on local communities. We saw examples of the reuse of empty houses as social places of social exchange. We can also see how people try to find ways to care for abandoned forests or abandoned fields in the third case. Also, of how people can adapt community structures to changing circumstances, and that might also entail like cutting down or downsizing existing community practices. However, the ways to cope with these changes differ from place to place. You might introduce sustainable ideas to the community from outside, building up everything by yourself and trying to convince people that this is the new approach to sustainability, that we have to do it that way. You might reduce existing community patterns to a minimum, or you might integrate local community practices in a more globalized understanding of what sustainable life should look like in rural Japan. So, coming back to the literature on sustainability, we can see that rural lifestyles very much shape the local understandings of sustainability, as is the case in the third example of the burning down of the grassland and cultivation of that grassland. But we can also see that the notions of sustainability very much shape local lifestyles, as in the first example of the Tohara Cafe, where people from outside tried to set up a new economic cycle. So what is considered sustainable and in what way in rural Japan? I think that the examples that I provided you show different answers to that questions that are very much embedded in the changing social relations happening in rural Japan. And of course, this includes a lot of conflict, as I mentioned. It is an opportunity, however, to rethink what makes up rurality. I think John Pagan very nicely showed us that now the rural life is more of a cosmopolitan rurality, both integrating traditional, so to speak, rural lifestyles with more globalized notions of production or globalized understandings of how to lead a meaningful life. So we can also think that these practices of sustainability are part of that cosmopolitan rurality with diversifying values and actors. So you might ask yourselves, so what? I argue that sustainability could be a potential common ground for community activities, as in the third example that I provided to you. Just as it is that sustainability is quite a broad concept academically, that where you can like cooperate with different kinds of disciplines or approaches, it might also be an invitation to work together for a more sustainable rural life. Thank you very much.